Welcome everyone to WeIQ TV. My name is Judith Glaser and I'm here to spend time with Bruce McEwen, one of my absolutely favorite neuroscientists and tell me how it's
Neuroendocrinologist.
Neuroendocrinologist. Very special title that not many people in the world have. And I'm so thrilled to be here with Bruce. Bruce and I have known each other for over 10 years. He's at Rockefeller University, where I came to see him speak one day, knowing that I had to clear my calendar to meet this fellow. I'm so glad that you gave me a chance to come down and grab you so that we could get to know each other.
Absolutely.
Your work is extraordinary, and I'm here to introduce your work to people in 75 countries around the world, thousands and thousands of people who are curious about the neuroscience of conversations, the neuroscience of, and you go much broader than that, because stress impacts all of us in so many ways. So your paradigm to talk in is going to be stretched a lot bigger for our coaches. I've talked a lot about stress, but the way you talk about it is extremely different.
Yeah, different than most people, that's true. Yeah.
Yes. Can you just share with our audience, when you started to discover something bigger, you took stress, which a lot of people say stress, cortisol, we know where it happens, lower brain, amygdala hijack, but you have taken that and created such a bigger platform that encompasses the whole body around how stress works. Can you share some of that with us?
It started in a long time ago when I, as a biochemist, joined the laboratory of a psychologist here at Rockefeller named Neil Miller, who was the father of what's called behavioral medicine, the importance of behavior in affecting our health. And one of the interests at the time was how hormones act in the body, what they do. And there was the idea that hormones help regulate the expression of our genes. And this was true in other parts of the body, like our liver, and for estrogens, our uterus, the uterus, and so on. But nobody really had thought about what hormones would do to the brain.
Wow.
So my first discovery was that a part of the brain called the hippocampus, that I'm sure we'll talk about, which is important for learning and memory, but also for emotional regulation, has receptors for cortisol, for the stress hormone. And this sort of opened what we call a window and a path where we and others have found that other parts of the brain also have receptors for hormones of all kinds, not just for stress hormones, but for sex hormones, for thyroid hormone, for metabolic hormones. And so the brain and the body are communicating, or at least the body is communicating to the brain. And the brain, of course, is regulating what goes on in the rest of the body. And together they they regulate each other for better or worse.
Right.
Because under adverse conditions, stress and other kinds of stressors, these can lead to diseases, the diseases of modern life, like heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, also depressive illness, and also to some extent we think Alzheimer's disease, are all accelerated by adverse experiences that cause these hormones to cause problems in the brain and the body that lead to the disease state.
You just changed our framework big time, and I'll explain why. Is that most people have spoken about the brain as being where we think, right? And without all the other things that you're talking about, which is how do we think? It in part depends on the quality of the hormones that are circulating in our body and the emotions that are happening in our interactions. And so you've really opened it up to triple levels of insight and connect things that so you can't just say, I use my brain for thinking.
While we tend to look at, say, one stage of our lives, say as an adult or as aging, what happens to us early in life, even before fertilization, has a lifelong influence on who we are and our trajectory of our health. So, for example, early life abuse and neglect, as opposed to a very positive early life experience, sets us on a course in the adverse case for greater incidence of all these diseases of modern life, more depression, more likelihood of Alzheimer's disease, earlier aging, whereas positive experiences early in life through a positive family experience or good caregivers can lead to just the opposite, much better health and what we call health span as opposed to lifespan.
Wow.
Because, you know, if you're living and burdened by disease and misery, that's not the way one wants to live. But health span means living a life full of meaning and purpose.
So we're going to be talking about that today to give the people, the coaches, and we have people that are in all different industries in these different countries. And I think the target audience is receptive no matter where they're living and no matter what their backgrounds are, because this is about all of us. How do we come into the world and bring some things with us? We do bring some things genetically that could make us less capable of handling our life as it's presented to us, right? And how do parents, how do teachers do something at the early stages before that imprinting becomes the course of our life, the arc of our life?
Right. And I think one thing that's important before we get into it is to realize that while our genes are important and certainly determine the limits for what we can become, they are not the absolute determinant. If you have most of the diseases of modern life, if you are an identical twin, the chances that if your twin has a disease, that you will get it are still only on the order of 50%.
Oh, wow.
If you're a relative that is of the same family but not an identical twin, then the likelihood may be 30%, 20%. If you're unrelated, it may be even less. It will be less than that. So genes, except for some very special diseases, don't determine the outcome. And it's all the experiences we have, as I said, from fertilization in utero, newborn, young adult, aging, that really determine the trajectory. This is called epigenetics.
Absolutely.
And it refers to, we say, above the genome, things that regulate the expression of genes.
So I have been taught, and I speak to the coaches, and I hope that I'm accurate. You'll tell me if I am or not, that these are called transcription genes as opposed to template genes. Template genes kind of are brought forward, but they don't have the switches that can go on and off. But there's something called transcription genes, which through conversations, the FOXP2 gene is the conversational gene, and that's one of the things that allows us to have people influence us, parents, teachers, everything, to shift what might have been abuse in the early stages to something quite beautiful if we have the right people surrounding us. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, our DNA has about half of the DNA is something that used to be called junk DNA because nobody knows what it does. And the actual genes that determine our structure and function are not many more than in a worm, for example. But because we have this junk DNA, which has been put there actually through the invasion of certain kinds of viruses and the DNA incorporated into our DNA, that's what regulates us and makes us human. And modern science is just beginning to try to find out what that so-called junk DNA is actually doing that makes us human. And so, yes, we have the structural genes. We have genes that in combination will regulate things like, you know, the verbal communication. We have genes that are important for many different functions. They're all subject to regulation of one kind or the other by a whole host of factors that scientists are just beginning to discover.
Do we know, for example, in conversations, what percentage of 100 is influence, either internal, external, or other places, how much influence that our interactions with people have in this story that we're weaving now together?
Well, I mean, one of the most important things, of course, is how positive or negative social interactions, positive conversations, just social connection. We talk about serve and return. You say something, I say something back. And this is particularly important for a mother and child. And maybe you've seen what's called the still faces video, where a mother stops interacting with her child and the child has a tantrum.
Yes.
And actually, adults in a public speaking challenge, there's a famous stress challenge called the Trier Social Stimulation Test, where a person gets up and talks about something very personal, like what they want to be in their life, with two people in lab coats who are sitting there looking very bored or very hostile. And people freak out.
Yes.
They're not getting that response.
Well, they're being judged, basically.
And
yes.
their stress hormones are going up. Their heart rate is going up. All sorts of things are happening to them that can have negative consequences if they go on for a long time.
Right.
Whereas the positive social interactions have exactly the opposite effect. It triggers the production of hormones like oxytocin, which facilitates sensitivity, bonding, and even sensitivity to negative things, but it makes people more socially aware.
One of the things I want you to give us clarity on is that when we talk about what the brain is for, again, at one time it was to think and to store knowledge, and it was much more the thinking side. You have opened up a completely different paradigm, which I love and which is so important to those of us who work in conversational intelligence. And you talk about the brain as being has the ability to be a predictive regulator of internal sensations, even before it's complete. What the story is to be able to predict. So there's a lot of mathematical storing in the hippocampus, I'm guessing, of patterns of things, and then it's up to us to coalesce them at some point. I want your words because I have my story about it. But how does it become a predictor?
Well, I mean, we of course, we use a whole variety of cues in our prior experiences to anticipate situations and predict, in a sense, what may be happening. If you've had a positive experience prior, then you're likely to have more positive anticipatory reactions. If you've had negative experiences, then the opposite may be true, and you may be very anxious. And so, of course, it's then important in interacting with somebody who has that anxiety to try to calm them down, say in a job interview or many things that go on. But there's something very important about the human organism that, as opposed to perhaps lower animals, Robert Sapolsky wrote a book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And of course, the implication is they probably don't imagine what's going to happen, and they don't anticipate as much as we do. I think they probably do with some cues. But we have this ability to anticipate. It's our sort of our prefrontal cortex. And that's good, in a sense, but it can also be bad. Because you can imagine things that may never happen. And a person who's extremely anxious may start imagining all sorts of things that probably won't happen, but then it can completely interfere with their ability to function normally, shall we say. We
call that movies of the mind. And that every person every person makes up their reality based on the little data points of their experience. And if I'm going to give the positive for you, which is true, that every time I think of meeting you, I have these positive anticipations of good things happening. Where leaders get into trouble is when they see a person in the company or in their team who had one or two bad things happen, and they quickly go to conclusions. We call going up the ladder of conclusions, and that's the movie that they've made. And it can completely destroy a relationship. You have a fabulous way of looking at early childhood experiences that I think all of us need to know, because we have a lot of psychotherapists, we have a lot of deep coaches where they go back in time and try to look at things with people. I'd love to touch on that. If that happens, how permanent, as an example, is that in our life? And how does it mark our life?
Well, I mean, I'm a member of something called the National Scientific Council for the Developing Child, and based in Boston, a pediatrician named Jack Shonkoff, a group of scientific colleagues, and they also have a group of practitioners who are trying to apply this knowledge and do interventions. And then there's another group that actually is called Frameworks. It's an advertising agency in Cambridge, Mass. For good causes, and they try to formulate words and concepts for example, the term toxic stress, or the term I used earlier, serve and return, are what they have created. These things, these words mean something to a wide range of people independently of their, background. And so in order to sell these things, shall we say, to the public, to policymakers, to whomever, you have to have terminology that gets at this, that people can understand.
Yep.
And then, of course, the practitioners are trying to use the knowledge from neuroscience and biology to do an intervention. So, for example, the prevention is, of course, the way to go. And there's something called the nurse-family partnership that was started by a man named, pediatrician named David Olds, and puts a skilled nurse social worker into the home of an expectant mother or young family, often someone who has not had the best experiences themselves in their childhood, to provide them with social support and knowledge of how to handle a newborn child and how to interact with them without yelling at them and all of these things, controlling their emotions as much as possible. And this has had, in the places where it's been applied, it's had enormous value in what we call return on investment. The kids are more likely to go to school, to do well in school, to have jobs, to do well in life. Now, if you can't prevent, then what do you do? And there are programs that try to deal with teenagers and adolescents, and one of the newer programs, at least in my awareness, is at the university or in Georgia with African American kids. But this could apply to anybody. But an adolescent, 11-year-old, with their caregivers, are given I think it's a 7-week intervention that helps to teach the parents monitoring skills, the adolescent self-regulatory skills, because learning to self-regulate when you use your cell phone, how you talk to somebody else is very important. In the case of African Americans, how to handle racial discrimination and so on. And it turns out that this 7-week intervention and supportive parenting reduces the tendency for inflammation, systemic inflammation to occur. It protects against the development of the prediabetes. It appears to protect against depression. And the most remarkable thing is that with the number of years in poverty for these kids, parts of the brain we mentioned earlier, the amygdala, the hippocampus, that are involved in emotional regulation and memory, normally get smaller as a person goes through many years in poverty. Well, this intervention seems to completely protect against that from happening.
I'm so excited about what you said, because you have given us a paradigm, and all the people who are online have been part of our program for a whole year. And we have parallel approaches which are dramatically and amazingly helpful in a short amount of time, which is calling out, you called it the serve and return.
Yeah.
We have push and pull.
Okay,
And
same idea.
when people get stuck in too much push, then they show up as leaders who are not effective. And then we have to teach them to get back into this rhythm of push and pull. And at that level, you said, I love what you said, because again, it's reinforcing we're experimental in a lot of what we're doing, and now you're bringing even more science to prove it, that when you create new words, it breaks a pattern, because the word has new meaning that gets created with the therapist or whoever it is, and it's different for they don't say stop doing this, because stop doesn't work. But they'll talk about, for example, do less of this. We call it down-regulating and up-regulating, and I'm sure there's language, right, that causes people to try something new. We call it being an experimenter, and I'm hearing a lot of the same things. And it works in a shorter period of time, which astounds most people, because some people say, you'll never fix that person. That leader's too tough. We've tried. Well, how have you tried? Well, we've told them to stop doing it, and they don't stop. It's that.
Well, that, of course, brings up this new study of what's called mindfulness, which apparently has different forms. The common view of mindfulness is bring your mind into the present. Stop ruminating about things you can't change.
Right.
And I think that's one of the very important lessons that we all have. If you're in the present and you're interacting and not having this thing in the back of your mind that you're really angry about or worried about, you're going to do better in these kind of interactions.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's also the whole aspect of empathy, feeling what the other person's feeling, and part of what you just said of not being too dominant and realizing what the other person is saying and how that affects you,
Yeah.
and so on. And so the end result of this particular program, involving what I think was a 9-week intervention, or maybe it was even longer than that, but of intense interactions with other people, was actually to increase the gray matter volume in various parts of the cerebral cortex.
Speak to that a little bit more, because
Yeah.
that's what I think the story that I had heard about and you were telling me about is the cab drivers in the UK who grew their hippocampus because, unlike just the bus drivers, they had to come up with more memories about the roads that expanded their hippocampus, and in ways that doing good things can do it as well. Serving up an experience of oxytocin instead of cortisol with the person is going to help expand the brain. And even our thinking of, oh, your brain's going to stop growing at 20, is not true.
No,
these
not.
interactions grow throughout your whole life. Does it go to 100 if we live to 100, or?
Well, we don't know yet. But I mean, what we know from, I think one of the first indications that the brain, even of older adults, is plastic, were studies first in animals, older animals, where getting them to be physically active, normally they're sitting in cages and not active, actually increases the production of new neurons in the hippocampus. Neurogenesis, we call it.
Right.
And it enlarges the hippocampus and makes them smarter, able to do the memory tasks. It improves the regulation of their emotions. And then there's a study that was done on people in their 60s and 70s, getting them to walk an hour a day, 5 out of 7 days a week. This was done in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. So in the wintertime, they walked on a running track. And in 6 months to a year, it enlarged the hippocampus and improved memory. It also improved blood flow and function of the prefrontal cortex, so they were more efficient in making decisions and had better working memory. So these are real brain changes.
Yeah, wow.
And that may, I mean, in the case of the hippocampus, they may also involve stimulation of neurogenesis, which never completely disappears as one gets older. So the plasticity is there, the potential is there. We just have to make use of it by, in this case, physical activity. But then we've begun to realize things like the mindfulness and other interventions also can affect brain structure.
One of the things that I have come away with in my research, but you're adding so much to it, is that it actually can extend the lifetime of a person. So not only your memory capacity and your ability to fight off all sorts of dementias and things like that, but it actually can extend your life. Is that true?
Yes. I mean, besides, of course, what we know about physical activity and our heart and our metabolism, it also has beneficial effects on the brain. We say it opening a window of plasticity so that other things can direct that plasticity, for example, like the mindfulness training. And one other very important element in all of this is having meaning and purpose in life. There's a term called eudaimonia, which sort of refers to this. And the idea is that a person may do something that requires emotional and other energy and even be stressful at times, but is meaningful to them because, for example, they're helping somebody else out, for people doing things like in art or in the academics, in many aspects of the executive volunteer corps, doing something meaningful for people who've had that experience and have retired, or in Baltimore, something called the Experience Corps, where elderly lower SES people were involved in going into schools and helping with reading, with discipline, and so on. This has been shown to prolong life and also improve the health span, term I used earlier. So especially meaning and purpose. And this is something that's so important with an increasing number of elderly people.
Yep. Well, we talk about the difference between empathy, which you mentioned, and compassion. And empathy is, I feel your pain. And there's a new book that came out about compassion, going one step up, which is what you're talking about, giving back, and the concept of how can I help you changes the chemistry of the person who asks it, and clearly changes the chemistry of the people that get the help. And rather than people being alone, which is one of the things we're going to get into now about what these different stressors are all about, the levels of stress, being alone is one of the most horrible things for human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And can produce a lot. What's the chemistry when you are left alone and when you feel abused or are abused? Is it constant cortisol or and other things that are connected to that?
One of the things that's very important resulting from being isolated or lonely is sleep deprivation, not sleeping well. And of course, the circadian variation, as we call it, is very important for promoting body health, for being able to respond appropriately to stressors, turn them on and turn them off as needed. And if you have a flat rhythm, as we say, if you've sleep deprived, shift work, jet lag, or just simply lonely, most lonely people have very poor sleep. Some of them don't for whatever reason. But this is a factor that contributes to it. And so the cortisol rhythm, it's not just the cortisol rise or fall, there's a rhythm. That it goes up before we wake up in the morning. It gets us hungry for our breakfast cereal and get us physically active for the day, and then it goes down and should go down at night until it comes up the next morning. And that allows then the body to mount up an appropriate cortisol response when challenged by a stressor, by an actual stressful event.
So you've just offered a new paradigm. Some of the coaches and leaders that are listening may have already heard that, but what I heard you talk about now is the circadian rhythm. And since you talk about three types of stress, positive, tolerable, and toxic, could you help us understand how they connect to what you just said so we can be good at this?
Right. We use those words stress very loosely almost every day and many times a day. So you have positive stress, which is taking a challenge, giving a talk, writing a paper, having an interview, doing something in the workplace or at home that requires taking a bit of a chance. But if it has a positive outcome, you feel rewarded, your self-esteem is improved, you will do it again. And you have to pick your battles so that you do it. You don't pick something too overwhelming. When you do, you may not succeed. But then you've got good enough self-esteem that you can weather the storm, and the next time you'll be a little more careful in what you do. Tolerable stress is when we have something that happens, losing a job, change of a relationship, loss of a loved one, pretty devastating at the time. But if you have good internal resources and you have good social support from friends and family, material support will be helpful, and you can weather the storm and be resilient and go on functioning. But toxic stress almost speaks for itself. You may have the same experiences, loss of a job, but you don't have the internal resources. You've had adverse early life experiences or even experiences growing up where these kind of situations are really pretty awful, and your reaction then is sort of over the top. That means that you're not going to be able to be as resilient. You may not have the good support systems either. And so it gets under the skin and can cause problems. And we talk about this concept of allostasis and allostatic load, where the hormones like cortisol that help us adapt and survive, and we need them, can also turn against us when they are overused or dysregulated amongst themselves. So you have too much inflammation, or too little cortisol, too much cortisol relative to the other mediators. Well, those are conditions in which you then accelerate the production of diabetes, of cardiovascular disease, contributes to depression, and a whole host of the diseases of modern life. That's what we call allostatic overload. So the connection between being unable to control having toxic stress and the acceleration of these diseases of modern life is what we're talking about. Most of us are, when we're really talking about bad stress.
What does healthy look like in your world? We have a concept that we talk about what healthy looks like, where you're supportive and things like that. Well,
yeah, I mean, most everybody has experiences that one would like to sort of redirect in a more positive direction. Some of them are more severe than others. So I gave the example of the adolescents and their caregivers. Adolescence is apparently a time of what we call with a window of opportunity. It's a time of change. So is pregnancy for a woman. So is perhaps going away to college, and or getting a new job, doing something that starts one off in a different direction, and I believe we're beginning to realize that there are opportunities during that time. The plasticity mechanisms are ready to be pushed and redirected or directed by other kinds of interventions. And of course, physical activity opens itself windows. And so being physically active and at the same time engaging in some of these interventions, even like mindfulness, interventions that try to counteract feelings of burnout or depression, treatments for mild depression, behavioral treatments. All of these things can probably work better during times when there is this open opportunity of change.
So is it possible that we could link, for, again, our listeners, that somebody taking a new job, even though they're older, could be one of those windows of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Being given a bigger team to work with, so it's a bigger challenge. So for people that are coaching someone through that, instead of having them talked about as the debilitating challenges or the too much for you to handle challenges, some people fall into that language. There's a language that helps people lift up and access more capacity in their brain, different types of functions that open up the bonding with the person feeling rewarded by the job, all those good things that can make a difference in how that person receives the conversation to activate. Is that all that true?
Absolutely. And we talk about resilience. And what resilience really means is the ability to make a good outcome out of something more negative. And one has to learn, and this is where self-esteem and what we call locus of control, feeling in charge or able to do it, comes in, is if you know from prior experience that you can do something, you can handle something and overcome it, then you're more likely to attack a new situation with that optimism that I can do it.
This is the most exciting of all the things we've been talking about. For me, hearing that is that how our coaches and leaders and people that are learning CIQ, conversational intelligence, is dramatically changed when they come in thinking, what can I do to help that person's identity become stronger, to be able to take charge so that they, in a way, downregulate some of the cortisol and that kind of chemistry, and upregulate their ability to take on an uncertainty, which you talk about.
Right.
Because so much is uncertain in the brain. And it gives them a way to make a bridge over that uncertainty.
Yes, absolutely. Just remember that when we talk about our cortisol going up, we want it to go up at the right time. We want it to shut off at the right time. If it stays up for too long, we got problems. If it doesn't go up at all, we got problems. So I'm trying to get people to think more sort of subtly about what cortisol means. It's actually a very important facilitator of adaptation, as are all of these other mediators that are involved, the inflammatory response is important for fighting an infection. But too much inflammation can do you in,
Right.
and so on.
We've heard that there's a number like 26 hours, which is maybe what you call the toxic side of this. I don't know. I need your help, and we need your help in explaining it. Where you ruminate and it kind of hangs out there for a long time. Is there something like that that's really true?
I would think that it's sort of a little bit more complicated, and that has to do with your lifestyle, because we haven't really talked about this yet. We've mentioned how well you sleep. And obviously you can have a bad night's sleep because you're worried about something. Whether you're eating too much of the wrong things, whether you're smoking or eating too much alcohol, how much socially involved you are. All of these things are often the products of ruminating, being stressed out about something. And so the degree to which one can stop that rumination or solve the problem will allow one perhaps to adopt more positive health behaviors, like I'm too anxious or worried about this thing to go out and walk around the block. Well, maybe walking around the block or going out for a run or something is the best possible thing you can do, because it may help get this thing out of your mind.
Much better than having a drink of alcohol.
Absolutely. There you go. Remember that it's health behaviors that we adopt, either for better or worse, bad health behaviors, that are often the product of being in this state of being, as we say, stressed out.
Mm-hmm. So we're now learning a lot about things we can do ourselves, things we can do with the help of others, and that's, again, where our audience comes in. What are there other things that you think we should be knowing about and thinking about? Meditation is something, learning how, is that in part down-regulating? Do we put those two together, where you learn how to clear your mind, think in a space that doesn't have all these horrible fears in it, and kind of get at peace that helps your body get into peace.
That's getting into the present and stopping ruminating. And then there are these other forms of mindfulness meditation, which involve improving both empathy and compassion, and improving sensitivity as a result to other people and how they feel. These are all the things that seem, according to this recent study by a woman named Tanya Singer in Germany, seem to actually over time increase the volume of our amount of our gray matter in our cerebral cortex, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it.
It is remarkable. We never. I remember being in a classroom when in psychology when the teacher said your brain stops growing at whatever it was, first it was 7 years old, and then it was 19, and so forth. And I stood up and I said, I don't believe you. And she said, stay after class. Guess I embarrassed her.
Yeah, well, that's the change in mindset. Now we have evidence for it. So, we used to say dismissively for something, it's all in your head. So get rid of it. Well, it is in your head in a very real sense, because your brain is very much a living organ that changes and works in all these special ways. Speaking of brain plasticity and the view that the brain didn't change after you were born, the early stages of that were also to realize that when the brain did appear to change, that it must be some kind of brain damage. And so we've had, had to overcome this to say that this plasticity is good. Now, there's one kind of plasticity that's not so good. When you develop seizures, kindled seizures, your brain plasticity can change and create connections that cause that seizure to develop. But there's the other kinds of plasticity what we've been talking about are beneficial. Now, the other part of our sort of modern culture is, let's talk about depression, is when antidepressant drugs were first introduced, they were magical because here you could treat this thing that was in our heads, that behaviorally with an antidepressant drug. Well, it turned out that these drugs only treated maybe half of the people and not all the time. So people thought of them as like penicillin. you take this without any other thing and it will cure your depression like it would cure an infection. Well, that's not the case. And now the more we know about behavioral interventions, we realize they don't all work on all people, but they work about, the same frequency of the time. And even when you have an antidepressant drug, you need some kind of positive behavioral intervention with a therapist in order to make use of that, because the drug is sort of opening its own window of plasticity to allow a person to make changes. So our whole view of not only brain plasticity, but also the use and the meaning of drugs for these disorders of modern life, like Lipitor for cardiovascular disease, they don't cure you, but they may help push you in a proper direction, but you have to do things with your lifestyle, like physical activity and proper diet and good sleep and all the things we've been talking about, in order to really make a difference. So it requires work. And so does mindfulness require work.
So it's our belief, I'm speaking for all of us who have been through this process together, and the research that I've done, laying it side by side with what you just said, that there's a lot of mathematics behind the brain. And where you said serve and receive, and we call it push and pull, that I've learned, and Norman Deutsch, who's done some work and found other people that have, is speaking to that, which is that the patterns sometimes get out of sync. And if you help those patterns get back into place, those patterns create healthy things all over your body, right? So you're not just stuck in too much tell, and then elevating the chemistry of tell, which is not good for people who are just trying to learn something new, right? So that there's something, we look a lot at patterns, and it sounds like you've been doing that and studying the patterns that are healthy and not healthy. And the more people learn to notice the unhealthy, what is unhealthy and what is healthy, the more it becomes a core how we raise our children, how we raise our families, to notice those things. So it's a sensitivity to human beings that is, I think, is on the rise, or has the potential to be on the rise.
Is that? Yeah. Yes.
And we are helping educate people on what that means, so that you don't have to always just go to medicine, although medicine can help. But this is human beings activating a chemistry that is like a medicine.
Right.
And that's why I call it the alchemy sometimes of conversation.
And of course, beyond that, and it's probably beyond the scope of what you're doing, but it's important for people to realize the implications of this for our political system, and for our, the way businesses treat their people. The idea that you give people some control over their lives is very important. In business, and going back to the Tony Blair era in the UK, there was a report called the Atchison Report, which basically said that every social program is a health program, because whether it's housing or education or pensions or health care, well, obviously, it actually has both, depending on what it is, both positive or negative influences on people's health.
It's amazing. I have to share with you that one of the other segments we did is that a year ago I was approached by the Delaware government, and they said, we want to change our whole government, the way we relate to the health and welfare side of our community. And they had 300,000 people from Wilmington, Delaware, and I was asked to facilitate that transformation. And a year later, I went back just a month ago and videotaped them talking about all the changes that they're seeing in their team, which is wonderful, and the teamwork that's changed. Instead of people doing things on their own and directing people, it's teams working together, and that's having such a huge influence on the health of the people in Wilmington, Delaware. So they are now one of our studies that show exactly what you said.
This is, it's, as we often say, even if a person doesn't care about other people's welfare, it's going to cost us.
Big time.
And it's better if we care about people as well, and do something about it.
Yeah. I happen, and I'll close with this because I'm fond of Apple, and one of my long-term friends, 23 years now, and I coached her through, was the CEO of Burberry, and then was hired away. Took a couple years to get her over to Apple, and so she's doing amazing things. Apple wants to bring people together in healthy ways. So they're creating community hubs, redoing 500 different buildings around the world to help people come and get help in learning how to do things better using their technologies. And so I think
I've
that
seen this, yeah.
now Tim Cook has gone on air in Saudi Arabia saying, we want to bring education to help our companies work better, countries, excuse me, work better together. I think that's what you're talking about, is there's a movement towards better conversations, towards realizing the chemistry behind the neurochemistry so that we have choices and that we make the choices that preserve the lives and the health of the people we love and maybe even people who we haven't met yet.
Right, exactly.
But it's a movement in a way.
Well, my Apple Watch reminds me when I should stand up and how much exercise
So
I'm
I bet you're
every
about
day.
ready for that.
This has been great.
It's been absolutely fantastic.
thank
I'm
you.
Thrilled to see the progression of your work and how I wanted you to know, and my heart's beating extra big now because you have had such a huge influence on what I'm doing and reinforced the science behind it, the credibility of your work from the beginning, the scope, the reach. Before I had my book, or right after I produced it, I made this little book. It's Trust at the Moment of Contact, and in the middle, you're one of the few people that we list here, so you can see how you did. And that was in one particular client, they bought it for 65,000 people. So that was in one of our Fortune 40 companies. And I also know that you're in here, which is
you.
the book.
Well, I look forward to eventually seeing this.
Okay,
this,
cool. The interview.
interview.
Yeah, you're phenomenal. So thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Welcome.